Hello and welcome to Hobby Starter. I'm Debbie Kershaw. I'm a jewellery designer here at JewelleryMaker TV, and I'm going to be showing you how to get started with metal. So really it's an introduction to metalsmithing. So we're not going to be using any heat or any torches or any scary tools today. I'm just going to show you how to get started with metal so that you can get used to how the metal behaves, how it works, and you never know what might lead on from beginning your metalsmithing journey. So let's start with what tools we're going to be using today. I've been making jewellery now for, about 20 years, and I decided after a while that I really wanted to work with metal. So I went to an evening class when my kids were small, and then it sort of progressed from there. So I work with metal now in all different capacities, but you don't have to make really difficult, complicated pieces to be able to use metal in your designs. So let me show you first, before we get to the tools, what we're going to be making. So we've got here some earrings, and they're just domed metal. And I've got some pearls there, and they started life as just a flat copper sheet, a strip of copper sheet. So if I hold it in front, they started life as that. So there's something very satisfying about taking something from this to a finished piece of jewellery, and I think that's where the real appeal of working with metal comes into its own. So let's talk about some tools that we're going to be using today to make, actually we'll make a pendant to go with these earrings using all of the same techniques. So the first thing that we're going to need is copper sheet. Now this copper sheet is 0.4, but it doesn't matter too much what thickness of copper sheet you use to make this particular design, because the tools that we're using will actually accept any thickness of copper sheet. If you haven't worked with metal before, I would recommend using some 0.4, 0.5 copper sheet, simply because it's thinner and it's easier to work with. So it'll make your life a little bit easier. So you need your copper sheet. And then you'll also need a metal block. You can see mine is very well used and very well worn. So this is your metal block, and I've actually got it on top of a rubber block, which isn't strictly necessary, but what it does is it stops it being too noisy. So if you're in a place where you don't want to be making too much noise, it's quite a good idea to grab your rubber block there, but it's not completely necessary. So a metal block, which is quite an inexpensive piece of kit to purchase. You're going to need a hammer. Now this is just any old hammer, a nice weighted hammer that you're comfortable holding in your hand, just one from the shed will do. And then slightly more sophisticated, if you like, equipment, but it's not expensive. It's not an expensive piece of equipment to buy. I'm going to be using a dapping block. So this is basically a cube, and it has little indentations on the block there, excuse me, and as you turn it over, you've got all different little indentations, and what this helps you to do is to turn a flat piece of metal into a domed shape, sort of a concave shape. But in order to do that, you would usually get punches that come with your little dapping block there, and so that's one piece of equipment that we're going to be using. We're also going to be using a circular punch. So let me, and this is just to make perfect circles with your metal. Now again, you can cut your metal or saw your metal out. You don't absolutely need to have this, but it's quite an inexpensive piece of kit, and you can make circles of all different sizes time and time again without too much worrying. Now the other things that we'll be using, you're going to need something to make a hole in your metal. There are various ways you can do this. You can use a drill. You can use a pair of hole punching pliers, or you can use, actually there's a little hole punching tool that we do as well that you can make the hole with, so sort of whatever works for you. A couple of other bits we're going to be using is just a permanent marker and a file. Now you can actually use a nail file if you don't have a jeweller's file. That will be fine to start with. So that's about it, I think, for equipment. It sounds like a lot, but it isn't really. And then you're just going to need what we call findings to put your jewellery together at the end. So the findings are the workings or the mechanics, if you like, of the jewellery. So obviously when you're making earrings, you need to have ear wires so you can put them in your ears. When you're making bracelets or necklaces, you have to have a clasp so you can do it up. So that's what I mean by the word findings. But I'll go through that when we actually come to assemble the jewellery. So should we have some fun hitting some copper? Okay, right, so we're going to start off with our metal block and our copper sheet. So you can see that I've actually used this copper sheet already to punch out some holes. It's just the easiest way to get consistent circles if you use this tool. And this would be a 0.4 copper sheet because I can bend it quite easily. I'll be able to work on that quite a lot without it getting too hard for me to continue working on. Okay, so I need my specs. You need to make sure when you're working with metal that you're working in an open area, that you haven't got anything in your way, and that you really do need to have some sort of safety glasses on. Now I wear specs anyway, so I'm going to put those on. But just like when you're hammering, if you get any sort of metal that flies about, you don't want that going in your eyes. So just sort of a pair of safety specs, or if you wear glasses, that will be absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do with this tool, which is our little disc cutter that we sell on JewelleryMaker, you get all of these punches that go inside these holes. So all of the circles that you see here, you can make circles in those sizes with the punches. Now I've only got 2 here because they're the 2 I'm going to be using today, but you will get punches to fit all of these circles. So let's go with the largest one so that you can really see what I'm doing. Now the best way to prolong the life of these tools is to use something called cut lube. Now you can also use beeswax if you have any beeswax in your stash, or you've been using it for any of your other crafting. Beeswax works just as well, or a candle. If you've got a candle, you can use that too. So you don't have to be buying lots of things. And all you do is you'll see on your tool that you've got a rounded edge, which is actually your top. And then you've got the cutting edge, which is your sharp edge that will go through your metal. And all you want to do with that is whatever you're choosing, whether it be your cut lube, your candle, or your beeswax, you're just going to put a coating of that on there. So this isn't essential, but it will prolong the life of your tool because it just helps the tool to work. Now you're going to take your copper sheet and you're going to pop it. If I show you from the side, you've got this indentation here in the tool, and what I'm going to be doing is just popping my copper sheet in there. And if you have a look on the overhead, you need to make sure that the whole of the circle that you're going to cut out is full of your copper. So what I mean by that, if it's only halfway in or slightly got a little bit of a gap, you're not going to get a full circle. So just get right over the top of that and just make sure that the copper that you've got inside is filling that hole completely. Okay, and then you're going to take your punch with your sharp end and just bob it on top. And this is where we're going to be noisy. You might want to turn the volume down for a moment. And we're just going to hit this until it goes through and makes our disc. Okay, get ready for noise. Now you don't have to be super strong because it's quite a quick process. And then, as if by magic, we've got a perfect circle. Okay, so obviously at the moment, just move that out of the way, that's just looking like a very flat, uninteresting little piece of copper that but if you tried to saw that out or cut it out with metal shears, it would take quite a lot, even if you drew it first, to get that perfect. So that tool is very, very handy for making circles if your jewelry is going to involve circles. So you can either choose to use this as it is, and if you have a look at these earrings, I haven't actually done any texturing or marking of the copper to make it look any different. I've just left it as it is. So you can see with these earrings, I think they look pretty nice as they are. I just did a little bit of polishing up at the end, which I'll show you how to do. But there are lots of ways that we can texture. By texturing, I mean add marks and interesting textures into your copper. But before you do anything with your copper, the best thing to do is make the hole before you start. So you need to know what you're going to be making. Now, in the case of my earrings, I knew that I needed 2 holes in my earrings because I needed one at the top so that I could attach my ear wire, essentially so it can go through my ear. And then I knew that I needed my pearl at the bottom, so I needed an anchor point for my pearl. So let's just have a little look and see where we're going to put our holes. So the best way I've found to do this, and I'm not a very exacting jewellery maker, I don't tend to get the ruler out, but you're very welcome to find the centre and do that if you want to. But I usually just eyeball it. So a permanent marker will always come off later on with a bit of nail varnish remover or a bit of sanding, so don't worry. And I usually just put a little mark, roughly, where I want those holes to go. So I don't want it to be sitting wonky. I also don't want the hole to be too close to the edge of the circle because you've got that risk of it maybe going through and only having half of a circle. So the easiest way that I'm going to punch this hole is actually with these hole punching pliers. Now these are actually really, really good for making holes in metal that's not too thick. It's a really inexpensive and easy way of making holes in things, which you obviously need to do. So what I do is I just take my pliers, pop them somewhere near the mark, and it doesn't have to be completely exact, and just squeeze. And oh, okay, I've got a hole right there. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I'm just having a little look where my mark is, popping my pliers, and I'm not actually putting a lot of pressure on there, so that I've got my 2 holes where I need them to be. Now sometimes you'll find that the metal on the back won't come off completely, so you can take some cutters or some shears and just nip off any sort of little protruding parts. Now obviously when you're wearing jewellery, you don't want anything sharp or jagged that can stick to your skin or your hair can get caught in, especially with an earring. So I find the best way to make sure that these are nice and flat, especially if you're a beginner and you haven't got any files, is to use, you know, these 4-way nail buffing blocks, which you can get really expensively. And you know, you think to yourself, oh, that doesn't look very professional, but actually I've been making jewellery for all these years and I still use these, they're amazing. So if you take the most coarse part of your nail buffer and you just pop your piece down, and the part that you want to smooth off, you would just hit with a nail buffer. And this can work around the sides as well. If you've got any slightly jagged sides where the tool has gone through, and you can check by just running your fingers across, make sure that it's nice and smooth. You've got no jagged edges that are going to catch on anything. You can take a few minutes to do this. Now, if you do have jewellers' files or you'd like to invest in some, we usually have a pack of sort of 10 or 20 of all different shapes, and they look something like that. So they're basically the sort of files that you can get in your local hardware store as well. You might have a couple in your shed or in your garage that you can use. And these are a little bit more heavy duty. So these are going to do the job quicker, but they're still going to get rid of any burrs and any metal that's sticking up. So you take a little bit longer than that, but you get my meaning. And just decide which is the front and which is the back. You can usually see with copper sheet because your front is nice and shiny and your back is usually a little bit duller. Now you can decide now whether you want to leave it. So I left my copper disc like that and made my earrings, started forming my earrings. But you do have options, there's always options. Now to texture, you can use really anything. I've seen people use stones from the garden and sort of whack it with that and get a lovely indentation. I'm going to use a ball peen hammer. Now a ball peen hammer is basically got your round end and you've also got your flat end. So when you hit it with a flat end, obviously you're work hardening it and you're helping to make it flat again. But when you use that little round part, you're going to get really interesting texture into your piece. Now we do also, there are hammers that are texturing hammers, so one side will maybe have a stripe on, one side will have stars on, and you whack it and you get stars and stripes. So there's loads of options, it's really good fun, but we're just going to go with a ball peen hammer. Now if you wanted to use your hammer that you've rescued from the garage, or you've rescued from, you know, somebody's shed, you can also use this, because depending on what part of the hammer that you're going to use, it's going to give you a sort of pattern. So when I talk about texture, I'm basically talking about pattern. So let's go with the professional hammer, the ball peen hammer, and see where we go. So what you do, you need to have it on a metal block, and you need to have your metal block on a sturdy table. Please don't put it on your glass coffee table or your wonky bench. You need to have it on a sturdy surface. And then I'm just going to, what I'll do is I'll texture half and then leave the other half. Okay, so if you have a look at that from the top, you can see that I've got this really interesting sort of textured shape on one side, and it's completely smooth on the other. So it depends what kind of look you're going for. Let's texture the whole thing and see how we go. So just going around the outside, flaring out the metal. Doesn't take a long time. And you've got this nice, interesting shape. So if I hold that up to the camera, you might be able to just see that a little bit better. So you can see there that I've got that lovely little sort of interesting texture. And when I buff that up at the end, you'll see those sort of little dents, and it gives it a real rustic sort of handcrafted feel, which I really like. Okay, so once we've done that, you've taken your metal, you've made your disc, you've textured it or not, you've planned your design so you know where your holes are going to be, and you've made those holes. The next thing that I did to make these earrings is start to take my shape, it's called metal forming, from a flat just piece of copper into a really attractive dome shape. So this is especially nice if you want to be making rings where you want to have sort of a dome shape to sit in your finger. But usually we start off with some earrings or a pendant, because it sort of builds your confidence, it's not too difficult, and you know, it's not going to take you a long time. So it's not like you have to learn something for 3 weeks until you get the end result. If you're anything like me, you're impatient, you want something now. So you'll be able to make this jewellery in, you know, an hour or so, not even. So that I just think that that inspires you to want to carry on when you've got something lovely at the end of it. Okay, so we've got our piece of copper. So now, actually I'm going to put it on here just to save the desk. I'm going to bring in it's called a dapping block. Now this looks like a serious piece of kit, but it isn't really, and they come in all different sizes. Now this is my large one from my studio at home, but they do come in like half of the size of this, and I think you can get them for around £10, £12, so they're not really expensive, depending on which one you get. And they have, as I said earlier, all different sizes, so that you can put all different sizes into them. So I need to have a look and see which one fits my little disc the best. So I think I put a little permanent mark on the one that I used, if I can see it now. Oh, maybe not. So what you need to do is pop your disc inside, and it wants to sort of sit in there. It doesn't really want to overlap the outside, because if you're overlapping the outside, you're going to find that it distorts and you won't get the shape that you're looking for. And with your dapping block, you get your punches, and they sort of roughly fit in to each one. And what we would usually do is start with the larger punch that fits into the hole. So this is where we're going to need a heavier hammer. So I'm going to go back to the shed hammer that we used at the beginning to whack it and make the disc. You can never have too many hammers, just let me tell you that. I do like a hammer. So what we're going to do, if you can see, this is perfectly machined so that you've got this lovely smooth surface, and whatever you hammer that into is going to start to take on this lovely round shape. That's what it's for. Now it's not going to do it straight away, it's going to do it gradually. So we've just got to have something that I'm in short supply of patience, and you'll find that it's really satisfying because you'll start to see it become just as you want it to look. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to roughly take my punch into the middle of my metal, and then I'm just going to give it a hammer. It's going to get noisy again. Now you'll find that it will start to take shape, but it's not going to be perfect to start off with. What you need to do is start to angle. So I'm not going to hammer, I'm just going to show you. You're going to start to angle and hammer from different directions until this starts to look like a formed, neat and tidy disc. So that's what I'm going to do now. I can see that I've got some sort of bobbly parts in my metal at the top, so I'm going to angle my punch there, and I'm going to start to dome it. And you can, depending on how deep you want that dome to be, you can take it out and pop it in a bigger one if you don't want it to be too deep. And I'm just using my punch to get the shape that I want. So usually I'd be leaning right over this, but I don't want to get my head in the way. But I'm basically taking my punch to the side, sort of all around the inside, so that my metal is forming really nicely around the bottom until I'm pleased with the shape that I've got. Now you can, if you want it to be a little bit deeper, you can go down a punch size, and you can take that into the middle, and it might be just easier to get into those little nooks and crannies. So I'm going for quite an organic, rustic look here because I hammered it first. But if I take it out, you can see that it's gone from a completely flat piece of metal to a little domed piece of metal. So that could be a bead cap. You could use it as a bead cap. We're going to use it as an earring so that it's become more like jewellery. Than you could use your flat disc as part of an earring, and that's lovely, but I think it just looks really lovely having this kind of domed effect. Now, because we've used this again with a few tools, we're going to need to check once again for any sort of sharp areas, because every time you form your metal, and by forming I mean you hit it with tools or you manipulate it in any way, it can start to sort of fold a little bit and you can get sharp edges appearing. So you have to keep checking that you haven't got any of those sharp edges or uneven surfaces, and this is where your trusty nail block really comes into its own, because it doesn't take too much of the metal off, but it is making it really smooth. So I can feel here that I've got sort of a little sharp bit. And also, if you don't like the shape, if you want to sort of refine that shape a little bit, then you can just give it a buff. And if you were going to use your file, if you maybe had more of a rough shape and you felt like there's a little bit more work that needed to be done, and this is called finishing. It's basically sort of refining your shape. So you know, you can be as messy as you like really when you're beginning to work with metal, because you can always tidy it up later. It's a bit like using an eraser when you're drawing a picture. You can kind of erase bits. So files will sort of refine your shape. So if you have cut your circle out, or you've cut out, say, a triangle, and you're not too happy with the shape, the cutting, you know, you need a bit more practice, you can actually improve it with your file. So that's why it's quite useful and beneficial to actually purchase a set of files that are for metal, because they will take off metal, whereas your buffer will smooth but not necessarily take off any metal. So if you've got any areas that you're not liking, you just file away. Now when you're filing, and this goes for any metal project, you don't want to saw it forward and back. You just want to go one way. So filing, taking off, filing, taking off, filing, taking off. So I'm just going on the upward stroke just to get that sort of shape refined. And then once the shape's refined, I can go in with my block, and this is where I'm sanding it so that I'm actually getting that nice smooth finish. And I would work that all the way around until I was happy. Now, another thing that this sanding block is very good at doing is copper, as it ages, will change colour, which I quite like because it ages and it sort of does different things. And this kind of makes your jewellery age with you, which is lovely. But if you want that sort of super shiny copper look, then these nail buffers are amazing for that as well. You don't need any posh tools to get started. So what you would do is start off on your most coarse part of this, and this is basically different grits of sandpaper, but instead of having to buy different grits of sandpaper, unless you've got some in the garage, and my husband's got everything in the garage, I reckon there could be people living in the garage and I wouldn't know about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the most coarse part, and I'm just going to start to brush that away, and I can already see, which I will show it to the camera in a moment, I'll do a little bit of it and leave the rest. Now that will be quite scratchy, but you'll start to see that there's sort of a clean spot emerges. And then you want to go down to the next course, and you can sort of feel and start using that. And what this will do is it will bring it up to a shine, but it will get rid of any scratches. It will do it without any scratches. And this isn't, you know, a quick job. It's actually really satisfying just to go around and lift it up. And then when you're happy that you've removed sort of any of the scratches from the first bit, you can go down to your, usually they're white on these blocks, your very last piece. And what this will do is it will shine it up. And then I'll show you the difference. I'm hoping we'll be able to see it on the camera. So if I hold that up, I think, you can see where, I'm just having a look at my monitor, yeah, you can see where you've shined and smoothed that part up, and then this part is still, so that's sort of your natural copper, and the other side is your shiny copper, and that's what your nail buffer will do. So you could have done that before you started on the inside of this as well, if you wanted that really shiny look. Okay, so once you've got your disc ready and you're happy, if you're making earrings, you'd want to make another one exactly the same, and that is just involves making exactly the same size circle. So obviously when it comes to that, making exactly the same size circle is much easier if you're using that disc tool, because you're going to get consistent circles every single time. So we've got our disc and we've got our two holes, and now we need to use the findings and do the mechanics of actually putting the jewellery together. So I'm just going to move these tools out of the way, and I'm going to bring in my bead board to show you how we're going to assemble the jewellery. I would say if you're going to use your metal, get all of your components, so know what you're making, get all your components done first. Wash your hands, because it tends to be a dirty job, metalsmithing, and then you can come to your bead board and sort of do the cleaner part of it. So I'm going to get my bead board, going to bring it into shot here. So a bead board is a really useful thing if you haven't done any beading before, simply because it stops all of your bits and pieces from rolling away. It keeps them all in a dedicated space. If you haven't got a bead board, a piece of felt is really good on a tray, because that way you can keep everything where it needs to be. So I'm just going to talk through some of these, let me get nice and straight. There we go. Some of these findings, as we call them. So as I was saying earlier, a finding is a part of jewellery making, which is sort of puts your pieces together to make the jewellery. So we've got an earring wire here. There's lots of different ones. You'll know from when you wear your earrings. This is a shepherd's hook earring wire, and you need that because we need to be able to put it through our ear, or if it was a clip-on for people without pierced ears, or you might have a post. There's all different lovely ones. There's chain. So if you're making this into a pendant and not an earring, then you would need a length of chain. I've used copper, but it is actually quite nice to mix metals. So silver and copper is really nice, gold and copper, very pretty. And then obviously you need something to add from the bottom. And I love my pearls, so I've got a shell pearl here. And to enable me to get my shell pearl onto my earrings, I'll put it down so you can see it. This is just a pin. Now there's different pins, and this is a ball pin. You get different ends. Sometimes you get ones with loops on, and they're called an eye pin. And it's basically so we can connect things together. And then I've got my little circle here, and that's called a jump ring. Now that opens as well so that we can attach things together. So your findings come in all colours, all shapes, all sizes, fancy ones, plain ones, whatever you can imagine, you can probably get. And these really enhance your design as well as being practical so that you can put your design together. So we've got our little disc that we've just made, and it's got our 2 holes in it. So let's make an earring. So what we're going to need is to attach it to the earring itself, and we're going to need to put our pearl on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is take my pearl and just thread it onto my pin there. Okay, and then I'm going to be using some pliers here. Let me see if I've got my round nose pliers. I might have to just grab those. So I've got chain nose pliers, and you would get these in a basic toolkit on our website. You need a form of cutter, and I'm just going to grab some round nose pliers from my toolbox. And round nose pliers have basically got round jaws on, and they enable you to make loops. So jewellery making is all about making loops, because you need to use these loops to actually take your jewellery together. Here's some, got them. Oh, they all match. I couldn't do that again if I tried. So these are from our basic jewellery making toolkit at JewelleryMaker. And I reckon you can get a set of pliers for about £10, so it's not a big investment, but you absolutely need these to be able to assemble your jewellery. So the round nose pliers are the ones that have sort of the little cone shaped jaws. And these are absolutely essential because you need to make your loops. And if you have a look, you've got sort of a smaller end, and then it sort of tapers up. And this is so we can make different size loops. So smaller ones on the end, gradually increasing in size till we get to the top of the pliers. Okay, so this is what we're going to need to make our little loops so that we can attach our pearl to our earrings. So what I'm going to do, let's move this out the way so you can see. I've got my pearl here, and I'm going to place my round nose pliers a couple of millimeters just above my pearl, and I'm going to just flick my pin backwards over the top of those pliers just a tiny bit. So I'm just kind of getting a little notch, and then where that is, I'm just going to pop my pliers back there again. Now, like I was saying earlier, you've got a smaller loop down at the bottom, a larger one at the top. If you're making earrings, you're probably going to want to have the same size loops so that you're not sort of wonky when you're walking around. You haven't got one long one, one short one, although that can be trendy. So what we're going to do is bring the pin over the top of the pliers until it stops, and I'm going to show you what we have from the side. So that's essentially made your little loop. Now before we secure that loop, we're going to need to attach that. It's hot in the studio today. I'm going to need to attach that to my little dome that we've been making earlier. So if you have a look at the hole at the bottom, so you're deciding where that is, what we're going to do is just take the end of the pin and feed it through that hole, and it sort of goes around like a little puzzle. And you just need to make sure that you've got a loop that's large enough so that it's not going to get stuck, so it can sort of freely move around. And then once you're happy, this is how I do it, but you'll find your way of doing it. You're going to hold that in your hand, and I find that the round nose pliers are the easiest way to hold the loop. So I'm going to hold the loop, and then I'll show you. So I'm holding the loop, and I've got the pin out here at an angle, and then I'm just going to wrap this pin around and around. Now you can either do that with your fingers, or you can take your pliers and wrap. Now this is what's called a cold connection, which means we haven't used any soldering or any heat, but that is now really secure because there's no way that can come off because we've wrap looped it on. So you need to do your wraps until you're happy, and then obviously you're going to have this extra piece of your pin sticking out. So we don't want that. So we're just going to snip it off and get rid of it. Now here again, I usually take my hand, rub it over the top to make sure that there isn't any of that pin sticking out. And if there is, you're just going to grab your pliers and just give it a little squeeze so that that's all tidy and tucked in. So this is what we have. We have our little earring, let's bring it down a little bit, and your pearl attached. So that would be really pretty, I think, as a pendant as well. So I'll show you the different ways we can make this into different jewellery. So if you have a look again at the earrings, what I did on the hole at the top, I just added my earring wire, which I'll show you how to do. But if you wanted a pendant, you'd need a slightly different way of attaching it to, there's lots of different things that you could use. A string of beads maybe, you could use chain like I showed you earlier, you could use cord, which is quite a nice unisex kind of trendy look, your leather cord or nylon cord, or maybe if you do braiding, you could add it to a braided length. You know, there's so many things that you could do. You're the designer, that's the beauty of jewellery making. So let's make the earring first. So we're going to get our earring wire, and it's this one's called a fish hook earring. Well, I think you'll recognise this from earrings that you have at home, and it's got your little loop. Now, how to open this, you don't want to sort of prise it open, you want to open it like a door. So you're going to hold on to the loop, and you can see where it's sawn through, where there's a gap, and then you're just going to open it like a door. So flick it forward, and that will open that part of the finding. And then you just need to attach through the hole that you made earlier your earring onto that. Hold on. Now you need to make sure that you open it wide enough, so it might just take a little bit of playing with to just get him to behave. There we go. Pop it in, and then you just take your pliers and you close it exactly the same way again. And so then you've got your earring, which I think is really, really pretty. Okay. And also these are great because they move, and then you've got the earring there. Now, if you wanted to make that into a pendant, we do it slightly differently. Okay. So I've got another one here that I did all of the exact processes that we've just done to make this sort of dome shape. The only thing that I didn't do was hammer it to give it any texture. So this is just the copper sheet, and I haven't done any sort of polishing. But if we grab our handy little polishing block again, I can really buff that up to a lovely, lovely shine. There's a dog hair in there. You don't need dog hairs, they're optional. When you've got 4 dogs and 2 cats, it's unavoidable. And then we're going to, again, go down the grit, and we're bringing that up to lovely shine. It can get really addictive, this, and you can just have it till you can see your face in it, which is absolutely lovely. But you can also add sort of patinas to it, colours to it, all lots of things. But we're just getting started today. So that's really come up to be lovely and shiny. You could do that all over if you wanted to. Now, if you were going to do the inside of it to make it nice and shiny, you'd want to do that before you started doming it, because it'd be a bit difficult to get in there with this tool. If you were a silversmith, you had a rotary tool, you could do it. So you just want to make that shiny before you start manipulating it. And the only difference to what we did with the earring is that we're going to put a different finding on the top. So I'm going to take this ear wire off, nice and simple, just opening that door again and threading it off. And what we'd need to make that into a pendant is just a different finding. And the finding that I'm going to use is a jump ring. So a jump ring is essentially a piece of wire that's in a circle. Now you get different thicknesses and you get different sizes depending on the size of your hole. So obviously if that was quite a thick diameter, it might not go through the hole that I've got in the top here. So I might need a thinner one, and also sometimes you don't want it to show, so you might want a smaller one. So that's how you know which sort of size, but there'll always be a size to go with whatever you're making. So I'm going to take that. At the moment it's closed, but it has been sawed, so there is a little saw mark there so that I can open it. Now once again, you wouldn't want to uncurl this like distorting the shape, because it would be very difficult to get that perfect circle back again, and you just compromise the integrity of it, so it wouldn't be strong. So what you do is you find where your little saw point is, where they've sawn through that jump ring. You're going to put pliers either side, and then if I turn it this way, you're going to take your pliers away from each other so that you're essentially doing that, so that you're opening it like a door. And what this does is it makes a opening for you to attach, but it's also nice and simple to get that closed again, nice and flush, so that your component doesn't fall off. And then what I'm going to do is, same as I did with the ear wire, but I'm putting this on here, so now it's on a little circle. Now when you're dealing with chain, you can do two things. You can either put the jump ring through one of the links of the chain so that it always stays in the same place, or if you want it so that it can sort of move about the chain, then you can just put the chain inside the jump ring. So that's completely up to you. And then when you're closing, you're going to close it exactly the same way as when you opened it. So you're going to take your pliers either side, and you're going to close it again. So you want to aim to not have a really big gap here in the middle that anything can escape from. And sometimes that might involve giving it sort of a little wiggle. You'll feel as you give it a little wiggle, it starts to get stronger and more sturdy. And you might just want to do that until that sweet spot, you kind of feel it click into place. And then I'm going to hold it up so that you can see that that's now become a pendant. So that's a really nice way to get used to manipulating metal, turning it from a flat form into a piece of jewellery essentially. So if you think about what we started with, we started off with just a flat piece of copper, and we actually ended up with a piece of jewellery. And if you're wanting to get started with metalsmithing, the best way to do it is to start to work with metal so that you become familiar with how it behaves, how it moves, and then you can move on to the next stages. Now, as you work with metal, you'll find that the molecules inside the metal, the more you work on it, the harder it becomes. So that if you're trying to texture it and then you think, well, actually it's not taking the texture anymore, it's because it's work hardened. And that means that you'd need to heat it to soften the molecules in it so that you could continue working on it. And I would say that was the next stage on from what we're doing today. And in order to get to these stages where you're introducing heat and you might be wanting to work more ambitious projects, you want to start by learning how your metal behaves. So that earring and pendant project is a classic one to begin with. Also, if you just don't want to get any of the doming tools, you just want to sort of have a play with metal, a really great thing that you can do is buy either a saw or some metal shears. Now, metal shears are just like big scissors, but they cut metal. Now, they won't cut really, really thick metal. They will cut thinner metals. But the thinner metals are the sort of thing that you're going to want to be using if you're starting off, because it's easier to use, you can get used to it. And this is a great way to, say, make a pendant and have a play with metal. So let's do something that just doesn't involve a lot of tools at all. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to clear up a bit to start with, because this is starting to look like my craft room. Move everything to the side. Right, so we've got a piece of copper. We've got our metal shears, which is really the easiest way to do this, because sawing is a whole nother thing, which takes practice, but a jeweler's saw will do just as well. And I'm going to have a rough idea about what I want to do with this. So you could take a permanent marker and sort of draw out a little shape that you were thinking about. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go rogue, and I'm going to open up my metal shears, and I'm going to take just a snip of this metal here. Now when you use metal shears, you will get some sharp edges. So you're going to need your nail buffer, you're going to need your file. So what I'm going to do is just clip off my corners, because you know these corners can be sharp, and also you don't want it snagging on your clothes. There's nothing any more annoying than that. And then you can use your buffer block. And what I'm doing here is I am literally just taking off, just as we were talking about before, the sharp edges. So I'm now going to move this out and bring back my trusty metal block. So far all we've used, metal shears and the copper sheets. We've not had lots of tools, and we've got this really interesting shape that's sat here on my block. Now that's boring. That's boring. So I'm going to hammer it. Okay. So I'm going to leave the top, I don't know, 2 centimeters without any texturing, and I'll show you for why in a sec. So what's nice about hammering is when you get to the corners, you know, you've got this straight line, you can kind of splay it out so it looks like really organic and artisan. So you don't have to do it all over, you can do a few. So as you start to texture, you often find, especially on something long like this, that it will start to curve up. But ideally we want this to be flat. So this is where the flat side of your hammer comes in, because I can turn it upside down and hammer it flat again. All right, so that I've now got this nice copper hammered piece of metal. So let's move the block out of the way. And then you can really have fun with it, because you've got a nice flat surface to work with, so you really can start to take your little sanding block, and you'll find that when you sand it, you can start to see those little indentations, so that you really, really get that lovely texture showing through. And the longer you spend on it, the better result you'll get. So then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the round nose pliers again, and because I haven't worked at all this top part of this pendant, it's going to be a pendant by the way, it's still quite malleable. So I'm just going to get my round nose pliers. So just to remind you, they're the ones that have the little sort of circular shapes. I'm going to go on the top, and I'm actually going to just turn that over until it meets the back, so it looks like that. And if I turn it on the side, you can see what I mean. So that's now ready to be popped onto a chain or a piece of wire, and you can actually attach it through the little hole that you've made. But we haven't used a hole punch, we haven't used a drill, we haven't used anything at all. So what we've actually used is a metal block and a hammer and some shears, and we've made this little pendant, which I think would look really pretty on a piece of wire or on a piece of leather or cord, so that you get this kind of rustic design. And this is where the journey, I've lost it, this is where the journey begins with working with metal. So you don't ever have to go any further than this if you don't want to. You can just use all these really exciting shapes and forms in amongst your jewellery designs, or this can be the beginning of an absolutely amazing journey into metalsmithing, where you do solder and you do start to cut out shapes and you do start to use heat and the whole shebang. But it all starts here with projects like this that are not difficult, and they just build your confidence. You can make lovely jewellery, you don't need a lot of tools, and you can say that you work with metal. So it's really as simple as that. I hope you give it a go, because it's great fun, really addictive, and I don't think you're going to want to stop once you start. I didn't at all. So once again, Debbie Kershaw here. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope I made sense, and I really look forward to maybe seeing your designs if you post them online, or you just getting into your metalworking journey and having a go, because it's not difficult at all and it's incredible fun. So have a go. I promise you're going to love it, and we'll see you again very soon. So from me, bye. Thanks for joining me.